in this little
Well,
place that keeps me
a
happy.
person who sins is going to be bound by the law more tightly as time goes on. So you're going to be bound eventually. You begin by being bound spiritually, and then it develops into being bound emotionally. So in other words, you're constipated emotionally. You can't have emotions anymore. You know, you can't have feelings anymore. And then you're bound sexually as well. Eventually you get to that stage where you can't even have sex anymore.
You can't enjoy it.
Can't enjoy it. And then you get bound physically as well. You start getting illnesses that restrict your ability to function in your life on earth even. That's how it goes. And that's the consequences of sin. This is the net result of sin. That most of the world is in complete ignorance of by choice. You know, it's quite obvious that our bad choices are creating a bad world. But by choice, we try to blame it on other people too. You know, it must be the governments, and it must be the religions, and it must be the big enterprises, and it's never us. It's always somebody else, right? And so, in that state, you're basically saying, I'm happy to continue my sin because my corrupt faith tells me that there's really no other choice that's better than me continuing my sin. Right? And unfortunately for most of us, we never experience better to know how better could be. How nice it could be, things being better. We never experience that because we're so embroiled in our own sin. And our sin will bring us the painful consequences of the sin. Even in our physical state, that's what it brings us. So we never get to feel what better feels like even. On earth in particular, right? And so that just encourages the corrupt faith. And we get into this state of like doubt and hopelessness. Where it's like, what's the point of doing anything good on earth? I might as well just get mine now, my pleasure now, and avoid my pain now, and just like wait till the spirit world to sort that out later. Hopefully things are better there. And you know they're not better there actually.
And all you're doing is reinforcing your corrupt faith rather than feeling it, because corrupt faith is emotional within you. That feeling, it can actually get better, is an emotion that you need to go through.
A painful one. A
painful emotion. But when you live in it, you just reinforce it to yourself, you let your anger build. And when you enter the spirit world, it's still going to be with you, and it's going to take a change in sincerity to want to actually deal with what's inside of you. And then you will experience, as you rightly said, there's a lot of freedom when you deal with sin, because you're not always trying to avoid something. You spend a lot of energy on earth trying to avoid our pain, and it wastes a lot of energy. And you also feel a freedom. You don't feel tempted towards sin. You feel just peaceful in yourself more. But when you're doing this thing where you're just continually justifying the momentary avoidance, the seeking of, I don't even call it pleasure, because that's like blasphemous to pleasure, really what most of our addictions are. You know, they're not actually that fun, are they? But they are what we feel is the best we can get. And that's why we keep engaging them. And that's, you don't recognise how good things can be until you're willing to sincerely deal with some short-term pain rather than seek that avoidance.
And the only difference between here and the spirit world is when you arrive in the spirit world, if you're in the state of sin, you're not going to be living in a nice house. You're not going to be living with nice people you can talk to anymore. You're not going to be living in a nice, pretty environment that you can go to the beach occasionally and you can go off enjoying this river occasionally and go off enjoying this nature occasionally. You're going to be living exactly where your soul's sin has placed you. And for most people on earth, that's in the hells. It's dark, dingy, smelly, very uncomfortable. And that's usually the only thing that saves people from committing more sin. Because their environment starts degrading, even in the spirit world, if they commit more. And that's usually the only thing that stops them. Is I get a connection now between my environment in the spirit world and my sin. And so I go, well, maybe I should stop sinning. But even then, it's still pretty selfish.
Yeah.
They're not stopping for any other reason than it hurts themselves more. Right? And this is why if you can do this on earth, you're going to end up a far less selfish person than you would if you do it in the spirit world. Because on earth, you start doing it not just for yourself, but for other people's sake as well. It's a gift you give to everyone, not just yourself, the less sin you commit. Yeah, so, very important to see corrupt faith is a big driver. What you believe for your future, what you believe your actions will give you in your future will drive your decisions. And if you believe that your sin will give you the best outcome, you will continue doing it even if you think you know it's a sin. And because you won't feel it's a sin. To change, you're going to have to feel it's one. And by the way, you won't be forgiven by God until you feel it's one. So you can know it's one, but you won't be forgiven until you feel it's one. Right? And that's why most people receive a little bit of God's love at the beginning when they hear about God's love being available, and then they don't receive any more their entire life on earth frequently. All of my friends in the first century, barring Mary and John and a few others, all of my friends in the first century, most of them entered the hells. They'd heard me preach and they'd seen me perform so-called miracles and everything for years, many of them, some of them for more than 10 years, and they still arrived in the hells. Because in their heart, they still wanted to sin. Make sense? Yeah.